Okay, so yeah, in case you're not aware, my name's Roger and I'm doing this little European arguments sort of series. Done one on the money issue, taking money, just done one on centralisation, decentralisation, and this one is about going to the people. I'm calling it that. And this has come out of doing these talks around Europe that I've just come back from and some of the discussions I've had. And dare I say, it's probably the most important one. I mean, they're all important, okay? But if I had to choose one, this might be it. Might change my mind. But anyway, so why is this the most important one? Okay, so I was going around Europe, went to Amsterdam, went to Brussels, went to Paris, 200 people, whatever. And they all come in. And what I notice immediately is, well, they're all great people, right? Let me say that, right? You can tell they're great people, they're really animated, they're really serious, but also from only one, broadly speaking, only one cultural group, which is urban, educated, liberal stroke radical, okay? Very competent, fantastic, but there's a big problem, which is, with all due respect, they are not the demographic that are going to transform the global economy, okay? The demographic that's going to change them is the common people, okay? That's not a very exact phrase, so I'm going to come on to that in a minute, but let's just put that out there. So what am I talking about here? What I'm talking about is what in the political literature is called the paradox of political identity. And it's the single biggest problem in social movement building, and arguably it's or at least a central problem in the whole of politics. And it goes a bit like this, which is, crap things are happening, so you want to do something about it. So what you do is you go to a meeting and there's other people like you there because, there's people from a similar demographic that are worried about it, like, let's say, educated urban people. Not all of them, but let's say 1% of them. So that's great. So you have your meeting, everyone's sort of like you get on, you've been to the same university, you like the same music, you have the same sort of cultural attitudes. Fantastic. You're all mates, you want to go again. So you're going again the following week and it gets bigger and it builds up to say 100 people and it's fantastic and you're all the same. And the reason it builds so fast is because everyone's culturally similar. You talk in a similar way, have the same sort of etiquette. This isn't just about politics, it's deeper than that. But obviously everyone's, let's say, broadly left-wing and, blah, blah, blah. So that's great. But the paradox is the extent to which you're successful through building a social movement, through getting everyone like me to join it, you are unsuccessful in taking it to the next stage. Because at a certain point, you're going to run out of urban, sensible, educated people, and that's it. You're going to stay there. And you're not going to get onto the other demographics. But it's worse than that. It's when the other demographics come into that space, they immediately feel alienated. So this can apply to sort of, people of colour or whatever, marginalised people within the city, working class people, they're going to come in and go, hang on a minute, this isn't for me. And let me emphasise, this is not because people are being unpleasant or racist or whatever. Let's hope not anyway. It's just because they're different. And we're all like herd animals in that sense, that we love to be with people that we like. And then, so it's those guys. And then also you might go out to, rural Belgium, let's say, and go to a farming town. And those people don't want to join you because, they think it's just those urban types. So you've got a geographical problem and you've got a class problem. It's the two things combined. So that's the paradox of political identity. Political identity is great for getting going, and it's a disaster for actually getting to scale. So the biggest reason why Extinction Rebellion has been successful in the UK, where it's a lot bigger than everywhere else, and this is my central point, is that we decided to go to the people first, rather than just being buddy with all our mates in urban liberal circles, let's say, or radical circles. So that had an actual concrete implication, which was we organised public meetings in village halls, town halls, small towns, rural areas, and told people this standard talk, which is, we're fucked, we need to do civil disobedience, break the law, and there's a pathway to action, which is to come down to London and sit in the road. So that's 3 elements to it, which optimise mobilisation. People know that the truth is there, which is terrible. So they've got tears in their eyes because, oh my God, I never realised it was so bad. Number 2, you show them what has to be done about it, i.e. you have to have mass civil disobedience to get this job done quickly. And third, next Thursday, there's a non-violent direct action training, and off we go, form an affinity group, go and break the law. So the next point I want to make, and this is a really profound point, which is, and I've said this in the other talks about the money, is the whole social, psychological, emotional structure of the Western democratic world is being transformed, and arguably all around the world. But obviously I'm focusing on Europe, and there's implications obviously for Australia and the United States. But it goes a bit like this, is initially we just thought that there was only a small demographic that were concerned about climate change, because it was like an environmental issue, it's about polar bears, it's about looking after the planet, it's a typical issue, right? That's not the case anymore. We're in this climate emergency. So this has transformed the potentiality for mass movement building. In other words, farmers are not going to be able to farm in 10 years' time, right? That wasn't the case 30 years ago, just trundle along and everything would be fine. But now that's an objective truth, right? I mean, it might be 5 years, it might be 15, but it's coming down the tracks, right? So that's a fact. That's the first thing. And the second thing is farmers aren't idiots, right? A lot of them know this, but they don't know what to do. So they're a massive resource for mobilisation. But all these urban political people are going, well, for 30 years, farmers, didn't care about our issue, so what's the point of going to the farmers? Incorrect analysis. The correct analysis now is they're ready to be mobilised, right? So the UK has proved this. We went to these rural communities and what have you, and got farmers involved. We've got, people that have never heard about the Green Movement, never heard about the North Pole, right? They don't really even care about it. What they care about is the universal message, which is they're going to lose their livelihoods, they're going to lose their businesses, they're going to lose their communities, and their children are going to starve to death, right? This is what's coming down the line. Now that is a universal message. So this is the big sort of penny drops moment is, number one, if we're not going to get a mass movement, we're not going to get anywhere. So you're going to have to go to these guys anyway, because you're not going to fill it all up with liberal middle class people, because as everyone knows, 1% of liberal middle class people, radical middle class people will do stuff, but we also know loads of them just don't care because they've got too much skin in the game, and you know how it is. So what we need to do is go and mobilise the 1% of normal people, which actually happens to be a far bigger demographic because you're talking about the whole country. So let's say there's 10,000 people in London that get it, but you can estimate that there's probably 100,000 people around the country who were ready to get it. I mean, there's still 55 million people that aren't, but this is the next demographic to go to. Okay, so I want to be a little bit more specific about it, to give it a bit more concreteness, is that the idea I want to put forward is, so the urban, radicals and what have you, we're mobilising them. But there's this other group, and I want to be, it's not so much the common people, though obviously it is everyone, because it's a universal message. But the other major demographic to mobilise is the rural poor, or the rural lower middle class, if you want to be technical about it. These are people that have enough time to think about what's happening in the world, and potentially know anyway, that it's over for them because there's going to be no farming in the next 10 years and all the rest of it. So an example of this is, I went to talk to some people in Turkey, right? They're in Istanbul, great guys, totally into it. But we were, after talking for about half an hour, I think everyone realised that the people that are suffering most from climate change are small farmers in eastern Turkey, where there's been a drought for 10 years. So you've got this interesting thing where you've got two completely different demographics and never talk to each other historically, for good reasons, because they don't really like each other and haven't got much to say, suddenly find some objective connectivity. And that's what needs to be brought together through these talks. And I'll give a little bit example of this, from the UK, is another sort of demographic is, small towns where not much is going on. And as people probably know, is people in small towns are moving to the political right because they feel left behind. So they're already what you might call alienated from the system. But if you go there and do talks, you find a lot more of them are willing to break the law and go to prison and what have you, because there's not that much going on in their lives. So I can give you a few figures here. Is if I go to sort of Brighton or London or whatever, and I do a talk and I say afterwards, how many people want to get arrested to go to prison, then you might find 5 to 10%. If I go to let's call it a depressed, English town like Scunthorpe or Sunderland, or go to Wales to Carmarthen or something like that, then I find it's about 30%. So that's a bit of hard, data there. And why is that? It's not because people are green or radical or right on or culturally acceptable. It's because they care about their kids and they haven't actually got that much going on in terms of skin in the game. So they're more prepared to go out into rebellion. So we're missing this massive trick here. And I want to say something, this might go on to 20 minutes, hopefully that'll be all right. I want to say something about specifically how to do it, because I talk to people who know a lot about this, and I talk to people, in Brussels and what have you, and they're going, yeah, that's cool. They get it. But then, the big there's a big fear barrier, which is you go to some rural town in southern, Belgium. I mean, how exactly do you do this? Which is a good question. You don't just turn up and knock on the door of some community centre and say, hey, I'm doing this talk. But in actuality, that's sort of what you have to do. So there's a number of different ways. So I'm going to briefly go through them, and you're going to have to try a few different ways. I mean, obviously you've got a database, so you could send an email out to all the people in that rural area, maybe within 20 square miles, and say, I want to do a talk in the town. Can you find me a community centre or a church? And so I can come along and do it. And could you publicise it a bit, put posters up or something like that? So they'll do that for you. You just need to find 1 or 2 people in the region that will do it. Or if the worst comes to worst, you could just go and do it yourself. And then you do a talk, right? So don't expect anything dramatic. Maybe only 5 people turn up. I mean, maybe more, so that's great. But let's say only 5 people turn up. It's not the end of the world, because those are your 5 local people. And then what you do is you headhunt, as it were, the 2 that have got their head screwed on, and they're going to be most likely embedded in that community, right? And you say to those people, look, we didn't get many people here tonight, but we want to do it again in a fortnight. Could you, spread it through your social media or through your offline mechanism, ways, because they're embedded in the local networks. And, 5 times out of 10, the next time you do it, you're going to have 20 people there. And then you headhunt your coordinators, and then you get out of the space, you train them or what have you, and then they're on the go. And they're going to then promote it, according to their cultural references, about what's happening with farming, what's happening to rural communities, what's happening to rural incomes, what's happening when, there's no food and all the rest of it. So, and then you're on the go. So it's not a matter of sort of just strolling up and suddenly hundreds of people turn up. You're going to have to work on it a bit. But the main thing is just do it, because through your failure, you'll actually work out how to succeed. So you might only get 2 people. It doesn't matter. You'll get some data and you think, okay, I'll do it again, and we'll do it slightly differently. And obviously, once you've got the local people involved, then they do it themselves, because then it's like people like me, because if I did it, they're going to think, who's that person? Well, if it's Mrs. Jones from down the road, you're going, oh, right, this is. And as my tour showed, lots of normal people are really animated about this. So because it's this universal issue. So I want to finish on this fundamental structural point, which is it's a numbers game, right? So even if, you don't really like this idea, let's say, and you don't really want to do it, no, you've got to do it, because all those urban people are going to starve to death if you don't get the numbers on the street. In other words, if you don't sort this crisis out. So how do we do that? By getting thousands of people. What's the quickest way of getting thousands of people? Build a mass movement. What's the quickest way of building a mass movement is stop being snotty about people who aren't like you. Go out and talk to people you don't particularly like, don't particularly connect with. And dare I say it, it will enrich your life, because as I'm sure many people know, when you start mixing with people who aren't like you, you'll learn a lot about the world. So, there's a personal aspect to it as well. But at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. You need thousands of people on the streets of Brussels, Amsterdam, Paris, and this is how you're going to get it done. So just do it.